Hello friends and fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Kat's Novel Adventures. In today's video, I am sharing everything I read in May. May was another relaxing reading month for me. I participated in 2 readathons, Zombiethon as well as Horror Mayhem, and I participated in the Middle Grade March Book Club as well as the Dark Hearts Book Club. As for my reading stats, I read a total of 8 books, finished the other half of a book that I started in April, and I read 3 short stories. As for my ratings, for my books, I had 5 5-stars, 2 4-stars, and 1 3-star. And when it came to my short stories, I had 1 5-star, 1 3.5-star, and 1 3-star. Shall we talk about the elephant in my room? That would be Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. For some reason, I am struggling with not only writing a review for this story, but also giving it a rating that I can live with. So, as luck would have it, this book happens to be one of the read-alongs for Jane Austen July. So I have decided that I am going to reread Sense and Sensibility so that I can give it a fair rating and review. The good news is I have only half of July to read it. There is a schedule. And I am also planning to not only read it with my eyeballs, but to also listen to the audiobook. So we shall see what will happen. And right now it's sitting at a 3-star read. It may end up staying a 3-star read, but at least I will feel better about giving it that rating when I read it in a more comfortable situation instead of having it fractured over 2 months. This was my second year participating in Horror Mayhem, which is a month-long readathon where you read short horror fiction, anything that's less than 250 pages. This was hosted by my friend Mindy at Mindy's Book Journey, as well as a bunch of other terrific booktubers. They had a bingo board as well as some weekly challenges, and I decided to go ahead and read 3 short stories that went with 3 of the weekly challenges. For the local horror prompt, I dug into my Zombies Encounters with the Hungry Dead, edited by John Skip, and I chose the story Kolkata, Lord of Nerves by Poppy Z. Bright for Bright's connection to New Orleans. I happen to live about an hour away from New Orleans, so I thought that was pretty neat that I was able to find a story with a local connection. This story follows a nameless narrator who returns to his birthplace of Calcutta after his father dies. When he gets there, he basically just wanders every day aimlessly through the streets, taking in the sights, and he's not bothered by what he's seen, but he should be because he's in the midst of a zombie apocalypse. Yes, we have the people of Calcutta coexisting with zombies. On his daily walks, he always begins at a temple in honor of the goddess Kali, and he refers to her as Mother Kali. I really did like that this story is based in Hindu mythology. I love reading stories that have folklore and mythology is part of that. It's under that umbrella of folklore. And Kali symbolizes destruction of ignorance and helps those seeking God. Calcutta is also named in honor of the goddess Kali, so I thought that was pretty cool as well. This is a disturbing story. This place is grotesque, it's depressing, but there really is no plot line. The only thing I can think in reading this is that the author is wandering aimlessly, and that's kind of how the story reads. It almost reads like journal entries, like the narrator's observations, but it's more like in a narrative style. So the story wanders aimlessly, kind of like the narrator does, but there really doesn't seem to be a point unless we think about what possibly the narrator is searching for. And I think because he visits the temple every day, he calls the goddess Mother Kali, His mother died in childbirth, so he had no connection with his real mother. That maybe perhaps he's trying to seek the truth to his existence or make some kind of connection, and the closest connection he can make is with this goddess. I don't know. This is a very, very disturbing story, graphic imagery. It's not going to be for just anyone, so I would say tread lightly if you're going into the story. This was my introduction to Poppy Z. Brite. I ended up giving the story 3 stars, and I do think I would pick something up written by this author again in the future. For the other 2 short stories, I dug into The Monster Book of Zombies, Tales of the Walking Dead, edited by Stephen Jones. And the first story I read was The Blood Kiss by Dennis Etchingson. This was for the movie horror prompt. This story follows a young woman named Chris, who is a television writer who is trying to make a name for herself in the business. And she's hoping that the script that she's writing, Queen of the Zombies, is going to get her the recognition that she needs. What I love about this story is that it is a story within a story. You see what's going on in Chris's life, and you're also seeing what's going on in the script that Chris wrote. It is a story about revenge, both in Chris's life as well as in the script. It has a wonderful ending to it. I really think it reads like a television episode from like Tales from the Crypt, and I'm not surprised by that because this story was inspired by Etchinson's own real-life experience as a staff writer on an anthology series. Now, this is the first story I've ever read by Etchinson. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, and I'd consider reading more stuff by Etchinson in the future. For the classic horror prompt, I chose Herbert West Reanimator by H.P. Lovecraft. This story was first serialized in 6 parts in an amateur magazine called Homebrew from February through July of 1922. This is one of the first stories where a corpse is scientifically turned into a zombie, where they have animal-like qualities and they're uncontrollable. This story follows Herbert West, a medical student who experiments with the reanimation of corpses. His depraved science leads to some horrifying consequences. I really enjoyed this story. It is my favorite of the 3 stories that I read for Horror Mayhem. It has gothic vibes, it's very atmospheric, it was inspired by Frankenstein, which is also a fave of mine. In fact, H.P. Lovecraft wrote this story as a parody of Frankenstein. It has a wild ending, and it is also the basis of a crazy film called Reanimator, which I have seen a couple of times, and if I'm not mistaken, has a cult following now. I know that this is not considered one of H.P. Lovecraft's best written stories, but I loved it, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. The second readathon that I participated in was my own readathon, and that is Zombiethon, a month-long readathon, watchathon, activity-a-thon, all in celebration of Zombie Awareness Month. I really had a great time. This was my 2nd year hosting it on my channel. In addition to those 3 short stories that I read for Horror Mayhem, since they were zombie stories, I could count them for Zombiethon, along with 4 books that I read about zombies. The first book I read was The Forest of Hands and Teeth by Carrie Ryan. This is the first book in this zombie series for young adults. It's also Carrie Ryan's debut novel. The story revolves around Mary, who is a young girl who lives in a village that is surrounded by a fence. That fence is there to separate and protect the village from the unconsecrated. That's what they call the zombies in the story. And the only people that are supposed to go through the fence and can go out into the forest are the guardians. The guardians are a group that work alongside the sisterhood to protect the village and, to have things run smoothly in the village. Well, Mary has always been curious about what is beyond the forest, and that is because her mom used to tell her all kinds of stories about the ocean and how things were before the world basically fell apart. Well, one day, Mary's mom unexpectedly dies, And Mary finds out some things about the sisterhood that make her start questioning whether or not she wants to remain living in this village. Overall, this was an enjoyable enough zombie story. I really liked the post-apocalyptic setting with a village that's surrounded by a fence, that's surrounded by a forest, that's infested with zombies. I like that the village is isolated enough that the people in the village think that they're the last of humanity. And I also like that the sisterhood is keeping secrets from the people in the village about the outside world. With all that being said, I wish I knew more about the sisterhood. We don't know much about them except for the little bit that we get from the main character of Mary. So I really wish that would have been more explored. I also wish that we would have learned more about a young mysterious girl named Gabrielle. Also, there's another village that comes up in the story. I wanted to know more about that, as well as Roman numerals that appear on a path that Mary and a group of survivors end up taking. So I don't know. I felt like there was a lot of different plot lines going in different directions, so many loose ends, and I really wish I would have learned more. And then the other thing that I could not get invested in, and that was the main character, Mary. She was kind of blah. Yeah, she is young. Yeah, she's an outsider and she's a loner, but she's a loner by choice because she doesn't want to conform. She doesn't want to be a wife, which is expected of village life. And if she chooses not to be a wife, she doesn't also want to join the sisterhood. So she's very wishy-washy. I think at times she's very selfish. And all she really thinks about is trying to get out of the village and trying to get beyond the forest without really even knowing if there is anything beyond there. So I don't know. I really was not as invested in her as I was with the other characters in the story. In fact, I was more invested in the dog. So I'm not really 100% sure I'm going to read the second book in the series. I mean, I say that, but I really would love to know what happened to the group as a whole. I'd also really like to know if any of the questions that I had about the sisterhood, the other village, Gabrielle, if any of those questions I have will be answered. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. The next book I read was The Reapers Are the Angels by Alden Bell. This was the book club pick for the Dark Hearts Book Club, which is run by my friend Amy at Amy Noel Reads. This story is set in America years after it's been inundated by zombies. We are following a 15-year-old girl named Temple, who is a loner, not by choice, but by circumstances. And she is journeying across America, trying to find a home, a place that she can call home. And she thinks she finds one, but then she finds herself in a really bad situation that gets her back on the road, and she is being chased by a killer. Going into Zombie Awareness Month, I had high expectations for this book, and they were met. This story is well written, it's atmospheric, it has beautiful imagery, the zombies are dangerous and gruesome, wonderful character development, and in my opinion, that's what makes this story read-worthy, is the characters. It is terrifying, but it also brought me to tears by the end of the story. Unlike Mary in The Forest of Hands and Teeth, I absolutely adore Temple. She is tough, she's independent, she's fearless, but under that tough exterior, she is compassionate and selfless. I absolutely loved her relationship with the character Maury, who she comes across, who is all by himself, and she kind of just takes him under her wing. But let's talk about that killer, Moses Todd. Moses has the same resolve as Temple does, and they kind of go toe-to-toe throughout the story, even though they have a mutual respect for one another. And I will admit, I did not like Moses at the very beginning of the story, but he kind of grew on me, so much so to the point that I want to read the next book in this series called Exit Kingdom, so I can learn more about Moses Todd and his backstory. The Reapers Are the Angels illustrates how beauty and horror can coexist in the same way as life and death, and what it takes to be a survivor in extreme circumstances. I love this novel. I ended up giving it 5 stars. Next up, I read the first book in an entertaining middle grade zombie series called My Big Fat Zombie Goldfish by Mo O'Hara. In this story, it follows Tom, whose older brother decides to become an evil scientist. In his first experiment, he dunks a goldfish into toxic green gunk with fatal results. Tom decides to zap the goldfish with a battery, which brings it back to life, and the new Frankie now has hypnotic powers and is out for revenge. Swishy little fishy. I love Frankie the zombie goldfish. He is quirky, he's smart, and resourceful. Tom and his neighbor Pradeep are the best of friends. I really love their interactions with one another and how they're there for each other. Sammy, who is Pradeep's little sister, is absolutely precious, and all three of them are likable characters. But unfortunately, they have to put up with two older, obnoxious brothers who are just mean-spirited. And that is Mark, who is Tom's older brother, and then you have Sanj, who happens to be Pradeep and Sammy's older brother. I think My Big Fat Zombie Goldfish is a cool combination of heart and humor. It has adventure. It also has some unexpected twists and turns. And then there's a little sprinkle of supernatural with our zombie goldfish. The illustrations are great. They were illustrated by Marek Jaguki. Also, my copy happens to have some zombie games, some puzzles, as well as an interview with the author. And the book also contains two stories. The first story is our introduction to Frankie, the zombie goldfish. And the second story is about his first adventures in middle school. I really did enjoy this book overall. And I will tell you though, if you end up reading it, please make sure you have a revised edition, because I discovered after listening to the audiobook, and I was getting kind of disgusted with the excessive insults by the older brothers, that apparently some of the phrases and words that were used were problematic in the earlier editions of this book. And apparently the audiobook was done according to the first edition. So I ended up stopped listening to the audiobook and went back to read my physical copy. That's how I realized that I had a revised edition. Thank goodness, because I would not have given it a 4-star rating had I just listened to the audiobook, because the bothersome words and phrases actually kind of took away from the story. I'm so glad that Mo O'Hara made the revisions, because this is a well-written book and it's amusing. And I would hate for kids to miss out on something really fun like this just because of problematic elements like bothersome language. The last book I read for Zombiethon was Night of the Zombies by Kevin David Anderson. This is what I would consider an upper middle grade or YA novel. This story follows 13-year-old Sean Ripley, who has apophobia, asthma, as well as panic attacks after having a traumatic bee encounter at the age of 8. Therefore, he is not a fan of honeybees or Founder's Day, which is a day that celebrates the honeybee with all kinds of festivities in his hometown of Honeywell Springs, which is the honeybee capital of the world. Unfortunately for Sean and the residents of Honeywell Springs, a mad scientist accidentally releases a swarm of mutant honeybees that can turn humans into zombies with just one sting. Sean and his best friend Toby team up with a tomboy named Sam to find a way to save Honeywell Springs before it is too late. Night of the Zombies is fun, funny, full of frightful zombies, but it's more than just a zombie story. It's also a story about friendship and teamwork and not giving up when the circumstances get tough, taking risks and facing your fears. I really like the dynamics of the characters, especially the friendship between Sean and Toby. They have been friends since kindergarten, and they have bonded over video games and junk food, as well as James Bond. I will say I was not a fan of Sam at the very beginning, but as the story progressed, she kind of grew on me, and I do think the three of these kids ended up making a really great team. I loved all of the pop culture references. I'm pretty much convinced that Kevin David Anderson named some characters in this story after some actors, directors, or film characters that are somehow related to the horror genre. Of course, there are plenty of references to James Bond because Sean and Toby like the 007 and his films. In fact, the chapter titles are named after titles of either James Bond short stories, books, or films. And there are plenty of black and white illustrations and diagrams interspersed throughout the novel, along with a couple of pages of creepy but cool B-facts, courtesy of Dr. Max Romero. I really did enjoy this story, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Now I'm going to share with you the rest of the books that I read during the month of May that have nothing to do with zombies. The first book was a middle grade March book club selection, and that is Everything Else in the Universe by Tracy Holzger. This is a touching middle grade historical fiction novel that is set during the Vietnam War era. However, the focus is not on the Vietnam War. Instead, it centers on the impact that the Vietnam War had on American soldiers, their families, as well as their community. This story follows 12-year-old Lucy Rossi, who's very excited about her father returning early from Vietnam, where he was serving as an army doctor. She does realize that he's coming home as an amputee and learns rather quickly that his transition back home is not going to be very easy for him, for her, or her family. Fortunately for Lucy, she meets Milo, and the two of them form a friendship, and they come across a mysterious packet of photographs that send them on an adventure together. And in the process, Lucy learns some valuable lessons about friendship and family. Lucy is delightful, Milo is precious, and their friendship is awesome. I was so happy that they had each other during their personal struggles because both of them were negatively impacted by the Vietnam War. It is a beautiful story about family, friendship, as well as loss. Yes, I shed a few tears throughout the story. And it's not just a heartbreaking story. It is also heartwarming, and it also has some humor in it. There were a couple of moments where I chuckled. I found this story amazing, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. The next book is the 5th book in the Bunnicula series, and that is Return to Howelday Inn by James Howe. In this story, the Monroe family is going on another week-long vacation, and they cannot take their pets with them. So Bunnicula goes to stay with a neighbor, and Howie, Harold, and Chester are off to Chateau Bow Wow, also known as Howelday Inn. Does not take them very long to get acquainted with the other guests that are staying there, or get drawn into an adventure that surrounds the secret at Chateau Bow Wow. I love that Harold, Chester, and Howie are returning back to Howelday Inn. There's so much fun when they go there. There's always some kind of a mystery and, of course, lots of misunderstanding. They are joined by a cast of colorful characters, and I absolutely love the cat burglars. There's 2 of them, Felony and Misdemeanor. They are hilarious. In addition to humorous characters, there is a spooky mystery. Friendship and teamwork are, of course, at the center of the story, as well as the willingness to help someone in need. There are plenty of twists and turns that end up going in an unexpected direction that takes a serious tone towards the end of the story. I cried, y'all. Of course, James Howe brings humor, heart, and hope to this story. Alan Daniel is back as the illustrator, and Victor Garber is back as the wonderful audiobook narrator. This was another terrific Bunnicula story, and I gave it 5 stars. I continue with the 6th book in the Bunnicula series, and that is Bunnicula Strikes Again by James Howe. In this story, white vegetables are turning up again in the Monroe kitchen, and Chester is not very thrilled about that. His wild imagination gets the better of him, and he makes a terrible decision that sends Bunnicula to the vet. Unfortunately, the Monroes are distracted with a community issue, and this leaves Chester wide open to carry out his heartless plan. Harold intervenes and makes a decision that will impact the Monroe household as well as possibly costing him his friendship with Chester. Despite having some lighthearted and humorous moments, this is a dark period in Bunicula's life. In the whole entire series, this book has the saddest storylines and some frightening moments. I admit, my eyes were leaking while I was reading this story. Like Return to Howlday Inn, this story takes a serious turn. Friendships are tested, difficult decisions are made, righting wrongs are necessary, while love and loss are explored. Thankfully, Howie, felony, misdemeanor, and a little black and white critter provide some comic relief. James Howe, of course, has some super storytelling. Alan Daniels' illustrations are incredible, and Victor Garber's narration for the audiobook is awesome. I think readers will enjoy that Bunicula is front and center in this story, but the focus is not just on Bunicula, but also on Chester's relationship with Bunicula. This is a tender-hearted story with a satisfying ending, and it is worth all 5 stars. The last story that I read in May is the 7th and final book in the Bunicula series, and that is Bunicula Meets Edgar Allan Poe by James Howe. In this story, Pete wins a contest, and the prize is a visit to his school by his favorite author, M.T. Graves, who happens to be the best-selling author of the Flesh Crawlers series. The Monroe family is also thrilled because M.T. Graves is going to stay at their house. Of course, Harold and Howie are excited, especially Howie, because he also reads the Flesh Crawler series. Of course, Chester is convinced they are all doomed as he becomes suspicious of their dark and brooding guest, who appears to have a keen interest in the Monroe pets, especially Bunicula. I am so excited that I finally got to read this story because I'm a huge Edgar Allan Poe fan, and I love that M.T. Graves' pet crow is named Edgar Allan Poe. Like the last 2 novels, this story is also a bit serious but touching, with some melancholy undertones surrounding the mysterious author. I did shed a few tears. This story is also about experiencing change when entering a new stage of life, as well as facing fears and feeling inspired to try something new. James Howe's storytelling is superb. Eric Fortune, who is a new illustrator to the series, is responsible for the impressive illustrations. And we have a new audiobook narrator, Patrick Mulvihill. He did a decent job. However, kudos to him for following behind Victor Garber because he is not a Victor Garber. Like the other books in the Bunicula series, Bunicula Meets Edgar Allan Poe was another 5-star read for me. It was well written with plenty of humor and heart, lots of mystery and adventure, and I love finding out where all the characters ended up or what their future plans entailed, including Harold's book editor. I think that this was a satisfying ending to a gratifying middle grade book series. Bunicula and all his friends will always have a special place in my heart. I plan to continue reading the rest of the books in the Bunicula universe. Many thanks to my friend Amy at Amy Noel Reads for sending me down this rabbit hole, which I'm still in. And I want to highly recommend this book series to readers of all ages. Well, friends, that's a wrap on everything I read in the month of May. I had a relaxing month of reading, and I also enjoyed hosting Zombiethon again this year on my channel. I had so much fun reading zombie stories, as well as watching zombie movies and TV shows and participating in other zombie-related activities. A huge thank you to everyone who helped or participated in Zombiethon. How about you? What were your reading adventures in May? Let me know in the comments below. As always, I really appreciate you stopping by. I appreciate you watching, and until our paths cross again, stay amazing and be adventurous.